Welcome to Horrified Stories, where fear comes to life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Let's start our today's story. The door in my basement that wasn't there yesterday. The day started like any other. Morning coffee, a groggy scroll through my emails, and the faint buzz of my dog, Baxter, barking at birds outside the kitchen window. If someone had told me then what would unfold by nightfall, I'd have laughed and gone back to my caffeine. I didn't go into the basement often. It was more of a storage space than anything, a cluttered repository of forgotten boxes, old furniture, and tools I barely used. But that morning, a flickering bulb in the hallway prompted me to search for a replacement. I knew I had spares tucked away in a dusty corner downstairs. As I descended the creaking wooden stairs, the familiar musty scent of the basement greeted me. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling buzzed faintly, casting long, jittery shadows against the walls. Baxter followed behind me, his claws clicking against the floor, his usual enthusiasm tempered by a hesitant whine. I found the box of bulbs near the workbench, and was about to head back upstairs when I noticed it, a door. It was in the far corner, just beyond an old bookshelf. At first, I thought my memory was playing tricks on me. I've lived in this house for over 5 years, and I was certain the corner had always been bare. The walls were concrete, cold and unbroken until now. The door was made of dark, heavy wood, its surface scarred with scratches and deep grooves. The brass handle gleamed faintly, as if it had been polished recently. There was no reason for it to be there. No construction, no renovation, no explanation. "Where did you come from?" I murmured, stepping closer. Baxter let out a low growl, his ears pinned back, his tail between his legs. "Easy, but," I said, though my own heart was racing. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold metal handle. The air seemed to change denser, heavier. A faint hum vibrated through my fingertips, like static electricity. It wasn't locked. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. It groaned on its hinges, the sound echoing unnaturally in the confined space. Beyond the threshold was nothing. A dark void stretched out before me, impenetrable and vast. The air smelled different, sharp and metallic, and carried an unnatural chill. I felt an instinctive pull to step inside, but Baxter's frantic barking snapped me out of my daze. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my ears. Baxter continued to bark, his small body trembling. "It's just a door," I muttered, trying to convince myself, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I left the basement and tried to go about my day, but the door lingered in the back of my mind, like an itch I couldn't scratch. By nightfall, I couldn't take it anymore. Armed with a flashlight and a kitchen knife more for comfort than actual protection, he descended the stairs once again. The door stood exactly where I'd left it, ominous and out of place. I opened it, expecting the void, but this time, there was something else, a staircase, spiraling downward into the dark. I hesitated, my grip tightening on the flashlight. "Hello," I called out, my voice swallowed by the silence. No answer. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I stepped through the doorway. The air grew colder with each step, the sound of my breathing loud in the confined space. The stairs seemed endless, their surfaces smooth and cold, as if carved from stone. At the bottom, I found a narrow hallway lined with doors. Each door was different. Some were ornate, others plain, but all of them had a strange, oppressive energy that made my skin crawl. One door stood ajar, light spilling out from the crack. My legs moved on their own, carrying me toward it. Inside was a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with photographs, down scenes, maybe hundreds. I stepped closer, my flashlight illuminating the faces staring back at me. They were all of me. Panic surged through me, and I bolted back the way I came. The hallway felt longer now, the shadows pressing in. When I finally reached the spiral staircase, my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. I burst through the basement door and slammed it shut, leaning against it as I caught my breath. Baxter was waiting at the top of the stairs, barking frantically. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every shift in the shadows outside my window, set my nerves on edge. The next morning, I went back to the basement, half convinced I'd hallucinated the entire thing, but the door was still there, as solid and real as ever. And there was something else. Scratched into the wood, in jagged, uneven letters, was a single word, WELME. I couldn't bring myself to go back into the basement that day. Every time I thought about that door, its impossible appearance, the photographs, the word WELME etched into the surface of my stomach twisted into knots. Baxter wouldn't even go near the basement stairs anymore. He sat at the far side of the living room, his eyes fixed on the basement door, occasionally letting out a low growl. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd been under too much stress. Maybe I was sleep deprived. Maybe, just maybe, I was losing my mind. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was behind that door was real. And it was waiting for me. That night, the dream started. In the dream, I was standing in the basement, staring at the door. The air was thick, suffocating, and the sound of faint whispers filled my ears. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but they felt urgent, insistent. The door swung open on its own, revealing the spiraling staircase. A figure stood at the bottom, shrouded in shadows, its features indistinct. It raised a hand, beckoning me. I woke up in a cold sweat, the sound of the whisper still echoing in my ears. When I turned on the light, I saw thin handprints on the bedroom walls. They were faint, like smudges left behind by something that wasn't entirely solid, but they were unmistakable. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch with the lights on, clutching a baseball bat. Baxter sat beside me, his body pressed tightly against my leg, trembling. The next morning, I decided to confront the door again. Avoiding it wasn't going to make it disappear, and I couldn't keep living like this and sleeping, jumping at every noise, feeling like I was being watched. Armed with a crowbar and a flashlight, I descended the basement stairs. The door was still there, its presence heavy and imposing. This time, there was something new. Taped to the door was a photograph. I snatched it off the wood and shone the flashlight on it. The image was of me, standing in the basement, holding the flashlight and crowbar. My blood turned to ice. I whipped around, scanning the basement, but there was no one there. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. No response. Hands trembling, I opened the door. The staircase was still there, spiraling into the dark. I don't know what compelled me to step through again, but I did. The stairs felt steeper this time, the air colder, the darkness more oppressive. My flashlight flickered as I descended, casting jittery beams of light against the stone walls. The hallway at the bottom was unchanged, still lined with its impossible assortment of doors, but now each door had something written on it. "Do not open," "Turn back," "Stay out." The warnings only made me more curious, though a deep sense of dread kept me from touching any of the doors, except one. At the end of the hallway was a door unlike the others. It was made of dark metal, its surface marked with deep scratches and dents. Above it, in glowing red letters, was a single word, "Live." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. Something about this door felt alive, like it was pulsing with an unseen energy. A faint noise came from behind me, whisper, soft and almost pleading. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back to the door, it was open. Inside was a cavernous space, far larger than should have been possible. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting different versions of myself. Some were subtle in a different outfit or with a slightly different haircut, but others were horrifying. In one, my face was twisted in a silent scream, blood streaming from my eyes. In another, my body was covered in deep gashes, my limbs contorted at impossible angles. I stumbled backward, my flashlight shaking. "Why are you showing me this?" I whispered. The reflections didn't respond, but the whispers returned, louder this time. They were coming from behind me. I turned around to see the figure from my dream standing in the doorway. It was closer now, its features still obscured, but its presence was overwhelming. "Leave," it said, its voice low and guttural. I didn't need to be told twice. I sprinted up the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. The basement door slammed shut behind me as I burst into the living room, gasping for air. Baxter barked furiously, pacing back and forth, his eyes wide with fear. That's when I noticed the writing on the living room wall. Scrawled in jagged, black letters were the words, "You were Washington Northeast D." The lights flickered, and for a moment, the shadowy figure was standing at the edge of the room, watching me. Then it was gone. I knew now that this wasn't just a strange door in my basement. It was something far worse, a gateway to something I couldn't begin to understand. And whatever was on the other side wasn't done with me yet. The days that followed were unbearable. I tried everything to forget the door existed. I avoided the basement, kept the lights on at all times, and even started sleeping with the TV blaring in the background. But none of it helped. Every night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent, and every morning, I would find new marks around the house, scratches on the walls, shadowy smudges on windows, or faint handprints on the bedroom mirror. Baxter stopped barking. Instead, he cowered in the corner, his eyes constantly fixed on unseen corners of the house. It was as if he could see something I couldn't. Another day, someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound startled me so much I nearly dropped my coffee. Baxter perked up, but didn't bark, just growled softly, his ears pinned back. Through the peephole, I saw a man in his late 50s, dressed in a weathered coat and a hat that looked older than I was. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed, and he carried an air of unease that made me hesitate. Still, I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" "You're in trouble," he said without preamble. "What?" "A door," he said, his voice low. "You opened it, didn't you?" I frowned, see, the blood draining from my face. "How do you know about that?" The man glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to make sure no one else was around. "Because I've been where you are. I've seen what you've seen, and if you don't listen to me, it's going to destroy you." The man introduced himself as Arthur, though he refused to give a last name. He claimed he'd encountered a door just like mine years ago, in a different house, under similar circumstances. "They appear when the veil is thin," he explained, his voice gravelly. "They're not random, and they're not innocent. They're gateways to places we aren't meant to see." "What's on the other side?" I asked. Arthur's expression darkened. "Nothing good. Think of it like a fishing line. The door is the bait, and when you open it, you're the catch. They want you to step through, to explore, to keep going back until there's no way out." "Who are they?" "I don't know," he admitted, "and trust me, you don't want to find out." Arthur gave me a list of rules. 1. Do not open the door again. 2. Ignore the whispers, no matter what they say. Do not respond. 3. Do not sleep near mirrors or reflective surfaces. 4. If you see a shadow moving where it shouldn't, leave the room immediately. 5. Keep a light on at all times. They thrive in the dark. "And if I break one of these rules?" I asked. "You regret it," he said simply. Arthur handed me a small leather pouch filled with a coarse, gray powder. "Spread this at the base of the door. It won't get rid of it, but it'll buy you time." He paused, his eyes locking with mine. But you need to understand something. This isn't just about you anymore. Once the door appears, it leaves a mark. Even if you move, even if you burn this house down, it'll follow you. Your only hope is to outlast it. That night, I followed Arthur's instructions. I spread the powder around the base of the door and placed a lamp near the basement stairs. The whispers came as usual, but this time, they were muffled, as if coming from far away. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to hope that I'd regain some semblance of control. But that peace didn't last. The next morning, I found something new on the basement door, scratched into the woodwork for words. "We are not the Northeast." The following nights were worse. The whispers grew louder, their tone shifting from pleading to angry. I started seeing shadows moving in the corners of my vision, darting across the walls and ceiling. Baxter refused to enter the same room as me. He'd stare at me from the doorway, his eyes wide with fear, as if I'd become someone or something he didn't recognize. Then came the nightmares. In the dreams, I was back in the hallway with the doors. This time, the doors weren't closed, they were wide open, revealing horrific scenes, figures writhing in darkness, endless voids, and strange, unearthly shapes that defied logic. At the end of the hallway stood the figure from before, its hand outstretched, beckoning me closer. On the fifth night, the power went out. I was sitting in the living room when it happened, the lights flickering once, before plunging the house into darkness. Baxter started barking furiously, his growls echoing in the silence. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking as I turned it on. The beam cut through the dark, but it felt weak, almost useless. Then I heard it. A creak from the basement. It was subtle, but unmistakable sound of the door opening. I stood frowned, the flashlight trembling in my grip. The whispers began, louder than ever, their tone almost gleeful now. And then I saw it, a shadow moving at the base of the stairs, something dark and massive, its shape shifting unnaturally. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking. The shadow stopped, but the whispers didn't. They grew louder, pressing into my ears, into my mind, until I thought I'd go mad. I backed away, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline, until I hit the wall. The shadow moved closer, stretching up the stairs, its form towering and grotesque. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The power came back on, and the shadow vanished, but the basement door was wide open. The gray powder scattered uselessly across the floor. Arthur's warnings echoed in my mind. They want you to step through, to explore, to keep going back until there's no way out. I knew I was running out of time. Whatever was behind that door wasn't just waiting, it was coming for me. And I didn't know if I could stop it. After the shadow's appearance, everything felt different. The house didn't feel like my own anymore. The air was heavier, the walls seemed closer, and every sound, no matter how small, made my heart race. Arthur's rules had given me a sliver of hope, but the door's escalating behavior made it clear I wasn't in control anymore. Even Baxter, my loyal companion, had started avoiding me altogether. He spent his days hiding under the bed, refusing to come out no matter how much I coaxed him. It was as if he knew something terrible was coming. The following night, the whispers started earlier, just after sunset. I tried drowning them out with music, but it was useless. They were louder now, clearer. "Come back. Step through. You belong to us." It was as if they were inside my head, their voices overlapping, creating a cacophony of sound that made my skull feel like it was going to split open. And then, the banging started. It came from the basement, rhythmic and deliberate, as if someone or something was pounding on the other side of the door. I grabbed the crowbar Arthur had left me and stood at the top of the basement stairs, my flashlight shaking in my hand. "Who's there?" I shouted, though I wasn't sure I wanted an answer. The banging stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a single whisper, so clear it might as well have been spoken directly into my ear. "Let us in." Sleep was impossible. I stayed up all night, clutching the crowbar, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. By morning, I was a wreck. Arthur came by later that day, unannounced. He took one look at me and shook his head. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" "They're talking to me now," I admitted, my voice hoarse. "They want me to open the door." Arthur's face darkened. "That's how it starts. They'll weigh you down, little by little, until you can't resist anymore." "What do I do?" "There's only one thing left to try," he said, pulling a small, weathered journal from his coat pocket. He handed it to me, his hands trembling. "This has instructions, rituals, sigils, things that might weaken their hold, but it's risky if you do it wrong." He didn't finish the sentence, but his grim expression said enough. That night, I prepared the ritual. The journal's instructions were cryptic and unnerving, filled with symbols and incantations that made my skin crawl. I gathered the items it called for: candles, salt, a mirror, and a knife. I set everything up in the basement, just outside the door, my hands shaking the entire time. The ritual required me to draw a protective circle, like the candles, and chant a specific phrase while staring into the mirror. According to the journal, this would seal the veil and prevent the entities from crossing into my world. As I began, the whispers returned, louder than ever. The air grew colder, and the candle flames flickered violently, as if struggling to stay lit. "Come back," the voices hissed. "Join us." I ignored them, focusing on the chant. The words felt firm and unnatural, but I forced myself to keep going. And then, the door began to rattle. The sound was deafening, the door shaking on its hinges as if something massive was slamming against it. The whispers turned into screams, a cacophony of voices shouting over one another. I kept chanting, my voice trembling but steady. The mirror began to fog, and for a moment, I saw something shadowy figures moving just beyond the glass, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The door flew open, and the staircase was revealed once more, but this time, the shadows were there, crawling up the steps like living smoke. I poured the salt across the threshold, shouting the final words of the chant. The shadows recoiled, shrieking as if in pain. The door slammed shut on its own, the force knocking me backward. When I looked up, the basement was silent. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive energy was gone. I thought I'd won. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet. The whispers stopped, the shadows disappeared, and the basement door remained shut. Even Baxter seemed to relax, coming out from under the bed and wagging his tail for the first time in days. I allowed myself to believe it was over. But then, 3 nights later, the dreams returned. In the dream, I was standing in the hallway of doors again, but this time, something was different. The doors were no longer closed, they were open, revealing scenes of my own life. I saw myself as a child, playing in the backyard with my brother. I saw my parents, smiling at me from across a dinner table. I saw myself moving into this house, full of hope and excitement. And then I saw the door. It was in every memory, lurking in the background. Sometimes it was barely visible, just a shadowy outline at the edge of the frame. Other times, it was clear as day, its presence undeniable. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The door had always been there. I woke up in a panic, the whispers echoing faintly in my ears. When I stumbled out of bed and into the hallway, I saw it. The door was no longer in the basement. It was at the end of the hall, just outside my bedroom. Scratched into the wood, indeed, jagged letters, was a new message. "You can't run." What door? It wasn't just in the basement anymore. It had moved closer, like it was tracking me, waiting for the right moment. The chilling message scratched into its surface confirmed my worst fear. You can't run. The house felt even more oppressive now, the walls closing in on me with every passing second. The whispers were louder, almost unbearable, constantly gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I couldn't escape them. They were in my head, in my bones, crawling through every crevice of my mind. I looked at the door in the hallway, its presence now all-encompassing. It was no longer a strange anomaly. It had become my reality, and the longer I hesitated, the stronger it felt, the more powerful its pull. Baxter had long since abandoned me. He refused to leave his spot by the window, his eyes wide with terror, his ears pinned to his head. The poor dog had seen enough, and yet, even with his terror, he couldn't seem to leave the house either. There was no escape, no refuge. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a house with something I couldn't understand, something I couldn't fight. I had to know what was on the other side of that door. I had to find out if there was any way to stop it. But as I stood in front of it, the door seemed to beckon me with an undeniable force. It was as if it had been waiting for this moment, waiting for me to give in to its pull. The whispers were louder now, almost coherent. They spoke of a time when I would be free if only I stepped through. I felt the strange, almost magnetic urge to open it, to step forward and embrace whatever was waiting. And then it happened again. The figure, the one I had seen so many times in my dreams, stood in the doorway, but this time, it wasn't just a silhouette in the dark. It was solid, real, and terrifyingly close. The air around me grew cold, and for a split second, I saw it clearly. Its eyes were like black voids, and its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin, its teeth sharp and unnaturally white. "Step through," it whispered. Its voice was a twisted version of my own, like it was mimicking me, drawing me closer. The figure's hand reached toward me, long, bony fingers beckoning. I staggered back, cat clawing at my chest. This was it. This was the moment I had been dreading. The door wasn't just a door anymore. I was a trap, a snare, and I had walked right into it. I could feel the weight of its presence, pressing down on me, suffocating me. "Why?" I gasped, my voice breaking. "Why me?" The figure tilted its head, its expression contorting into something more monstrous, more alien. It didn't answer. Instead, it gestured for me to come closer. I turned, desperate to flee, but as I moved away from the door, I felt something shift. The air grew thicker, and the house seemed to twist and distort. The walls seemed to bend, elongating in unnatural ways, stretching in a way that defied all logic. My vision blurred, and the once familiar rooms turned into a maze of shadows and echoes. The whispers grew louder, louder than ever, drowning out all other sound, until it felt like my skull was being squeezed by an invisible hand. I could no longer hear myself think. The figure was closer now, no longer at the door, but standing just behind me. I could feel its presence, its cold breath on my neck. It was in my mind, twisting my thoughts, convincing me that there was no way out. "Step through," the figure said again, this time in a voice that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. It was almost hypnotic, and for a moment, I believed it. I truly believed that stepping through that door was my only escape, my only way out of the nightmare that had consumed me. But something inside me snapped. A final, desperate flicker of resistance surged through me. I remembered Arthur's warnings. I remembered the journal. I remembered the ritual. The hope that I could fight this thing, stop it from claiming me. No, I wouldn't give in. I couldn't. I reached into my pocket, my hand shaking uncontrollably, and pulled out the small vial of salt Arthur had given me. I had no idea if it would work anymore, but it was my last hope. The figure hissed as I poured it across the floor, but I didn't stop. I scattered it in a wide circle, chanting the words from the journal, my voice trembling but steady. The figure screeched, a sound so inhuman it made my blood run cold. It staggered back, its form flickering, distorting like a bad signal on an old TV. The walls began to shake, and the air grew colder still. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The whispers were screaming now, 1,000 voices all crying out in pain and fury. The house groaned as if it was coming alive, the ground beneath my feet vibrating with the force of something huge, something ancient, awakening. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything fell silent. The door was gone. I woke up the next morning with no memory of what had happened after the ritual. The house was still and quiet, the air heavy but no longer suffocating. I ventured downstairs cautiously, expecting to see the door standing in the hallway. But it wasn't there. It was as if it had never existed. But something had changed. There was no sign of the figure, no whispers, no shadows lurking in the corners. It was over. At least, that's what I told myself. Baxter was back to his old self, following me around the house as if nothing had happened. I almost believed that everything had returned to normal. That is, until I found the photograph. It was on the kitchen counter, face up, a picture of me, standing in front of the door, a look of terror on my face. I didn't remember taking it, and written in the corner of the photograph, in fresh, dark ink, were the words, "We LLB Washington ITANG." The door was gone. The nightmare had ended, or so I thought. But now I know the truth. Whatever it was, it's not done with me. It never was. And it will find its way back, just like it always does. And when it does, I'll be ready. If you like this story, don't forget to hit the like button, share and subscribe the channel. Help us grow. Thanks for watching.